Hi, bonsoir, good evening. I hope you are doing well. We are so happy and lucky to have you with us tonight or this afternoon for some of you. My name is Asma. I'm the founder of Deserta, which is a Montreal-based startup specializing in everything revolving around the fascinating world of artisanal wine and sake. And we love to share our passion through curation and education while always keeping things unpretentious and fun. We also create wine and sake lists for a few restaurants in Montreal, and we recently started to import some of our favorite sake here in Quebec. But enough about us. Today we are tackling a simple question, but the answer is not as straightforward as we may think. Is natural sake a thing? So to help us navigate through this controversial subject, we will be guided by my partner in business, Jean-Gabriel Vigneault, and Mariko Tajiri. So get yourself comfortable, pour yourself a glass of sake or wine, or even tea, we don't judge, and don't hesitate to ask us any question in the Q&A section. And in order to keep things interactive, we will ask you questions, and we are starting right now with two questions. So you will see them appearing on the screen. So we want to know if you think natural sake exists, and the other question is, have you ever tasted a natural sake? So take the time to answer, and while you answer, let's welcome our two guests. Hi, Jean-Gabriel and Mariko. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Hello, Asma. Thank you for such a warm welcome, and thank you for calling me a guest as well. That's very nice of you. Yeah, and as Asma was saying, we are so glad to have Mariko with us. Mariko is not only the national brand manager at That's Life Gourmet, which arguably has one of Canada's best artisanal sake portfolio, but she's also a WSET sanctioned sake teacher. That's a lot of S's right there. And she's also well-versed in the world of natural wine, working with renowned natural-leaning producers such as Tessa Laroche from Domaine Roche and the Tissot from Jura. So without further ado, I think we should get started on our topic. So as you guys know, the topic is natural sake. We all love natural wine, and we love it because it is more than a wine category. It is also a philosophy that has an impact on all winemaking choices. And that philosophy could be summarized by adding as less as possible, but also taking away as less as possible. And as some of you may have noticed, the term natural sake has started to appear, is starting popping around pretty much everywhere on the globe right now. And that would maybe it could be explained by a way to bridge the gap between the natural wine drinkers and the sake world. So today what we're going to try and find out is if there is actually an equivalent to natural wine in the sake world. And if so, what would it be? And should it be called natural sake, or is it a case of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole? So Mariko, before I let you talk, before all this big intro, I'm not going to ask you right away if natural sake exists, but I think we should rather explore what could it be, because unlike a natural wine and with the newly created the certification Vin Méthode Nature, I think it's like a year old, there were no real clear-cut definition or certification for natural sake. So yes, so that's me doing a huge detour to ask my first question. So Mariko, are there any concepts similar to natural wine that already exist in the sake world?
Yes, so that is definitely a very big question. And I have to say, this is my first time talking about natural sake, and it feels appropriate, well, at least in public, and it feels appropriate that it's with you guys in Quebec. So yes, there's definitely many concepts or philosophies and also techniques that exist in sake that are considered natural or at least low intervention. And I think we'll touch upon what is intervention in sake and what is on that scale. So you mentioned things like, we've talked in the past about things like natural yeast, spontaneous fermentation, and that does happen definitely in the sake world. Definitely a lot less than wine, but we will, I think we'll talk about sakes that have ambient yeast or kuratsuki kobo, also with things like after brewing, all the processes that we usually do with sake. What can we not do or what do we choose to not do is a big question. And then also I think we'll talk about rice farming and how we grow the base ingredient. Right? Yeah. Is that seems like
yes,
a lot of answers and not really.
Yes. But that's good. That's good because you're definitely setting the table for us just to discuss a few concepts I think that already exist in the sake world. That could be related to natural wine. And one of the first thing that I want to point to you, and that's something you're very familiar with, is the concept of shizenshu, a concept that I think has been popularized by one of the sake producers that you represent, Nida Honke.
Yeah, I was actually just studying a little bit beforehand so that I wasn't caught off guard here. But yeah, Nida Shizenshu. So Nida Honke, we just started working with since last March. So we visited in 2019. Yeah, there's Nida-san with his sugi, so Japanese cedar barrels, so kyoke. And this isn't something he uses for all of his sakes, but for a few of them. And I think
yes, you can see the tank in the background, right?
Yes,
the enamel tanks. Yeah,
the enamel and temperature controlled tanks there as well. But he does do, so first of all, he grows shizenmai, or so it's organic, no pesticides, but there's also this definition for him about whether he uses organic fertilizers or not within the brands. Odayaka, for example, was something that he created to apparently compete with his dad because he wanted to show his dad what he could do. So he created the Odayaka brand, and that one actually is, they're using organic fertilizers now. He also does natural spontaneous fermentation. So he was telling us in this, probably this very moment, the photo was taken, that some of his tanks or his shibo, his starters, take 90 days plus. So usually, even with the more natural styles, you've got 4 weeks of fermentation starter days, and he's talking about 90 to 120 days. That's 3-4 months. Yeah,
and
that's a very long time.
Is it because of the climate? Because Nida Honke is in Fukushima, which is in Tohoku, which is in the northern side of Japan, northeast side, I should say, as Tohoku translates. But although Fukushima is like on the border of Kanto and of Tohoku, is it because of that, or is it because the yeast, they take much more time to ferment because they're ambient and maybe they're not as strong, such a strong fermenter?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's actually a lot more of the latter points that you talked about. So when you use cultured yeast, you've got the strongest, the best yeast that have been selected over the years for fermentation or for aromas or different goals or different objectives. But when you've got kuratsuki yeast that's in the air, then you've got a lot more other things going. So potentially in your whether it's a kyoke or tank, or even an amphora, there's a lot of other things going on. So they're competing. Yes, this photo, I feel like it should be my profile photo. Yeah, so this is the same shubo was in the starter was in this amphora, but also in the kyoke in the wooden vat that we saw earlier. So these two, they put the shubo, all the ingredients in at the exact same time, but they're fermenting completely different speeds and temperatures. And the smell was different too. So the amphora smelled very ricey and like warmer and richer, whereas the kyoke was a lot sharper. And I guess technically maybe a little like cleaner in a sense, and definitely smelled more ginjo-esque.
And you think, how does it explain it? Is it because of micro-oxidation that is different?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely, yeah. You have breathing going through the amphora, of course. The surface area is also different too. So the opening of the top is different, but also, as you just said, the amphora itself breathes a lot more than the wood. Yeah, but the wood also has antibacterial properties. So I feel like that's also a big part of what's fermenting and what's not.
Especially sugi as well, because it's so oily, because I'm sure, they make deck, basically. Sugi is a type of cedar. So they make deck that go underwater. So, I mean, this is a material that is very resistant to any type of bacteria.
Yeah.
And do you know if he bottles separately is Amphora Shubo?
Well, this was an experiment. So this was the first year. So March 2019, I think he had bought it that year. So this was the first one. He didn't know quite what to do with it. So maybe I should check in and see if he wants to send me some. Yeah.
Can you send a bottle, please, my way? That would be very
to Quebec as well.
And I just want to go back a bit more on the concept of Shizenshu. I know that you said that he wanted to make something different from the generation before, and he wanted to show maybe a bit more of the organic side, maybe more the wilder side of sake, because he's using, as you were saying, it's Kuratsuki Kobo, sorry, but it's Kuratsuki Kobo in the real sense of it, in the sense that they're real ambient yeast, not proprietary yeast. But can you expand a bit on his philosophy behind it, what he wanted to achieve with Shizenshu? Because maybe it's something that we should touch upon, is that Shizenshu really is a line of sake that Nida Honki does. They have the Odayaka, they have two other lines, I think.
Tamura, Odayaka, Shizenshu, and they have the Kijoshu line, the 100-year sake.
Yes.
Yeah. So his father was actually already making the Shizenshu line, and my first time drinking Shizenshu was from a shop in New York, and it actually used to say natural sake in kanji, and then the last few years, his wife actually did all the design for the new Shizenshu and the new sakes. So it's all hiragana now. It's all Japanese writing instead of Chinese characters. But yeah, so his dad was making Shizenshu, and apparently he was selling it really well, because this was a time in the economy of Japan where if you made sake, you could sell it, was what people used to say. So in the bubble period, his dad was selling a lot of sake, but his dad got sick, and he had to come back to the brewery at age 28. And at that time, he wasn't actually that interested in Shizenshu because his dad had been doing it. And he created the Odayaka line, which was more kind of a classic Ginjo style. And that was also what was in fashion. So he thought he could prove himself by being very different from his dad. And then 2011 comes, and he's, of course, he's in Fukushima. So the earthquake hits, and his wife is pregnant. And this is the turning point where he made this very big statement that he was going to be 100% Shizenshu, and he was going to make all these choices to go kind of, I guess, back to what his dad was doing, but with respect to farming, to working with farmers in his region, but also having his own rice and farming responsibly, as well as very low intervention as sake can get. It can get more, as we know, natural, but he's up there for sure.
And because I've seen it used it with different producers, the term Shizenshu. And do you think it's Nida Honki that really started it, like to the really popularize the use of it, or is just something that's been going on way before, and that he just used it as a brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as I know, Nida Honke was the first to really put it on their label as Shizenshu. So when you make that connection, I think it's Nida Honke Shizenshu, and that's their kind of product name. And then Terada-san from Terada Honke, of course, is a little bit younger, so next generation in a sense, yeah. But I think, yeah, Nida-san definitely is a trailblazer and became kind of the face of it as a very humble person as he is. So, yeah.
And maybe we're going to talk semantics a bit, because I think it's very interesting, because Shizenshu, it kind of translate to natural sake, but not really as well, because it has a whole organic and natural in the really the environmental kind of way, you know. So how would you shu would be sake, or would be alcohol, but how would you translate shizen?
That's a good question. Shizen, yeah, it means basically nature. So if I say I want to go into the woods this weekend to be one with nature, I can say I'm going to go into the shizen. And then there's also things, you know, naturally, if I want to say naturally, I gravitate towards sake. You know, like I always want to drink sake. I can also use that in that sentence. I can say shizen ni, this is what I like, you know. So it's, yeah, it kind of encompasses the whole philosophy of natural. Like there's nature, the physical nature of being outside or with nature, mother nature, and then there's like actions that are more natural to your, you know, humanity or who you are. Yeah, so it's a big word, I guess. Yeah.
That was very that's super interesting. And I know that you talked about a bit about low intervention, and that's something I think I want to bring forward when we're talking about similar concepts in sake that exist. A similar concept, I'm talking about something that would translate from natural wine to the sake world, and that is the I called it an appellation, but it's definitely not an appellation, but it's just maybe a saying per se, the concept of Junmai Muroka Namagenshu. And that maybe Asma's going to put it in the chat, because it's there's a lot of R's.
Yeah.
And, that would be Junmai Muroka Nama Genshu. Maybe you can explain and elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah. Junmai Muroka Nama Genshu. Okay, so Junmai, for those of you who want to talk about that. So Junmai is, the literal translation is pure rice, and this gets people kind of confused, because, you know, what is pure rice and what isn't? Like, are we using fake rice? That's not what we're talking about. But Junmai is made without the addition of brewer's alcohol. So anything that doesn't have Junmai, you've chosen to add a little bit of distilled alcohol to your sake after fermentation, and you get this like very clear, lifted, pretty sake. You can also make very, very big volume mass-produced sake by adding alcohol, but that's not what we're talking about here. So Junmai, no alcohol added. Muroka, this means no charcoal filtration. Some people also talk about how they do other filtrations that are not caught in this word. So Muroka is only talking about charcoal. So I actually, it's right here in front of me. So this is activated charcoal that I bought on Amazon, and I actually put it in some sake recently to see what would happen.
And you were really, really surprised when I called you the supreme sake geek. I really don't know anybody who's done quite the experiment. So basically, just to make sure everybody understands. So what Mariko did, she bought a sake that was muroka, meaning not roka, meaning no charcoal filtration. And she bought basically some activated charcoal. She put it into sake, and then she took out the activated charcoal, which agglomerated or agglutinated with, aggregated, I should say, with the different particles in suspension, just to clarify the sake, basically, which is the main reason for muroka, and then just to try and have comparison of what is roka and what is muroka. That is pretty cool, though.
Yeah, it was fun, and it's not hard to do. And also in Quebec, you have a lot of muroka sakes, you know, available, because everyone loves the natural ish sakes in Montreal, it seems. So you can get that, and then you can, that's the exact same sake that I used for this experiment. And charcoal is easy enough to buy on Amazon or anywhere. And that's exactly what brewers do. They'll put in the charcoal, and then they'll filter that out. You know, that happens, of course, in the wine world as well, with different ingredients. But yeah, you can also use membrane filters. You can also use more, what's the word I'm looking for? So less intervention ways of filtering that doesn't have to be charcoal. And even with charcoal, you can do small amounts or a lot, or you can use different amounts of charcoal. And yeah, it's a huge spectrum, right? So you can do it very gently, just to kind of like erase a little bit of certain things, as if you were erasing something on your iPad drawing app, or you can do it very harshly, and then you can get some very neutral, boring sakes. Usually.
Yes, because I like to make, because I know you're calling it charcoal filtering, because it's technically, it's really is the textbook definition of it, because loca means filtration, right? Yeah. So, but I like, because for people who come from the wine world, I like to refer it to fining, because it's more of fining, because you're having a fining agent, which is in this case is activated charcoal, and then you're taking it out. So it's not really filtering per se in a wine sense, but it's more of a fining.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very true. So fining, it's almost like sterile filtration. No, sterile.
Yeah, it's sterile filtration.
Yeah.
Really, really, really fine mesh that takes everything out. So it takes like bacterias and then yeast and everything in the wine. So that's why you use sterile filtration. Would be more really like, I think the correlation I think would be fining.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And then there's people who do much more close to like racking. So, even though you are filtering it, this is a different filtering actually, I guess. So we're talking about like Nigori, or taking out the solids. That filtration, I like pressing more actually. Like WSET even, they talk about filtering, and I feel like that's even confusing. We're talking about pressing, right? So pressing and taking away the rice, is that filtration?
We're going to talk about it, I think, later. We want to kind of talk about Nigori.
Yeah.
But
right. Nama and Genshu.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We have two words still left to explain.
Yeah. So nama means literally in Japanese raw. So if you've got raw meat, you can call it nama niku. And in the case of sake, we're not pasteurizing. So if you say nama, it probably is meant to be completely unpasteurized. So not once it's 0 time. So you get very big, juicy. I kind of think I often get almond milk or a little bit of like wet wool, sometimes like wet dog notes to namazakes, different amounts of it, different qualities, of course. And genshu means undiluted. So this is the percentage that the sake finishes fermentation at, plus or minus, not plus or minus, but give or take 0.9%. But yeah, so genshu, undiluted, uncut, whatever you want to call it, but no water added.
So if we wrap this up and we're saying that Junmai Muroka Nama Genshu is basically in sake production term would be something that it has less intervention per se than actual sake, which is that could be aluten, which means with added alcohol. It could be roka, which would be a charcoal filtered. It would be pasteurized, and it would be diluted.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a great summary. So Junmai Muroka Nama Genshu sakes are, all they've really had done is the solids removed. So you're tasting the sake kind of in its very raw form of it. Yeah. And all sake starts out in this form, right? So what we do after to the sakes is often what we're drinking.
And we just put a picture, I think is casting right now, is a picture of one of the sake that we are currently offering, and that is imported by That's Life. And I mean, that's a great, that's really a great namazake, because I remember when we were selecting on your portfolio which sake we were going to bring into Quebec, I asked you, I said, Mariko, for sure I want a nama, but the thing is with nama is that they can be very fragile, and they can be, when they're transported, they can be very usually they're refrigerated. When you see it in Japan, you'll see they're kept cold. So that's something that you have to be very careful with. And I was remember when we were talking, was like, yeah, do you think we should import Namazake, how, in which condition it is? And you told me something that was very reassuring to my ears. And you said that Naminoto, the producer, came and he tasted it and he said that we're in perfect conditions. So I was like, yeah, for sure. So for sure, we're gonna bring it in, and I'm so happy we did, because I remember when I came in, I gave half a bottle to Asma, because yes, we share our bottles. And
smart, yeah.
Yes, and it was so beautiful. It was very super expressive. How Namazake are. They're it was super aromatic. It really it was beautiful, and still is singing in the glass right now. That's what I'm drinking right now, the Wataribune 60 from Naminoto.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy we brought that in. And as you know, it's the Junmai Muroka Namagenshu.
Yeah.
So,
I screamed only 5 minutes after tasting it of joy.
Oh, amazing. I'm so glad. Yeah, this is a really fun sake too. Like the Wataribune rice being an heirloom rice, and these guys make some very powerful, I guess is the maybe a word, like voluptuous sakes, but just so delicious. Yeah. And there's a football connection. Did I tell you guys his son is, I think, now 16, the brewer's son, and he's now he's been playing on the youth team for Real Madrid for a few years, and he's signed on officially, but I think he's back in Japan right now.
So drink Namazake when you're young and you'll be playing soccer professionally.
Yes,
is that what you're saying? Okay,
the whole family plays professionally or semi-professional, actually. Yeah,
that's very cool. And they're located in Shiga, right? They're not too far from Lake Biwa.
Yeah, you can hear the sound of the waves, which is why the brewery is called Naminoto, which means the sound of the waves. I'm just repeating myself. Yeah.
Great. And so that is very interesting sake, and that's cool, because I think that wraps up a bit about Junmai Muroka Namagenshu, and there's something I want to touch on, and I think one of the main difference between the natural wine world and the natural sake world would be that I think for a lot of producers, they would be producing a low intervention sake, but that will be only one of the sake in their lineup. And what I'm talking about, I'll ask you to explain this, is I'm talking about Shiboritati, or winter seasonal sake. Can you explain to us what is Shiboritati?
Yeah, so Shiboritati means it's just been shibori, so just been pressed. So, whether that's like lemon juice, if you go to Japan and get a chuhai, like a mixed cocktail kind of thing, they'll do Shiboritati lemon juice on the side or to put into your cocktail. But for sake, it means that the sake has just been pressed. So it's super seasonal. Like you said, you would usually only get it in the kind of late fall, so just about now.
Yeah, I think they're releasing it. I'm seeing more and more on Instagram.
Yeah, it's very sad that we can't go to Japan.
Yeah.
But we'll go again, or even in the spring when they've been pressed. So most breweries brewing only in the winter cold months start maybe October, maybe November, and then until April, May. So there will be a range of freshly pressed sake within Japan usually, or their local market. Yeah. And those are often, they're usually nama, they're probably muroka as well, maybe genshu, but they could be diluted a little bit with water, but they're very bright, juicy, and like sometimes a little spritzy or like a little sparkling. Yeah, not full on bubbles, but a little texture from the freshness.
So there would be Junmai Muroka Namagenshu, right?
Yep, usually, yep. Yeah, maybe a little bit of water to kind of soften it, but probably not much more than that.
And they would be, because there's definitely a relation with the weather outside, so they would be Nigori. So can you explain a bit what Nigori is? I know you talked a little bit about it when we talked about Roka, but can you elaborate a bit on what Nigori is?
Right. So Nigori means cloudy, and some people say it's unfiltered, or and it isn't. It's not correct. It's cloudy sake. So all sake, to be seishu at least, to be legally classified as sake, need to be filtered or pressed in some way or form. So it's not unfiltered, but you do get some of the rice lees. You get some of the kind of cloudiness that you get in sake in this in the bottle or in your glass, right? So if some thick ones, some very nigori like ones that haven't been treated or filtered at all. I think we were talking about doburoku before, which hasn't been filtered at all, so that's not technically legal seishu, but that is very chunky and you'll be full, so you should probably have it for breakfast. Might also be a little bit lower in alcohol depending on the product. And then you've got everything from there to slightly cloudy to medium cloudy. It depends on what you're trying to make.
So basically, if you're making nigori, you're taking less away from the initial product, right? From the raw material, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I guess that's a way to put it. I mean, all sake starts out in some way of nigori. It's kind of like I guess what you're saying is how far do you take the nigori to clear range? Like, so Mitobe-san, who makes the 1898 that you guys will have, no, you already have it in Quebec, but sorry.
We haven't released it yet, but yeah,
So
we're definitely gonna have it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the one of the sakes that you may or may not have in Quebec, he uses a fune. So his pressing machine is a old school wooden press, and you can use it's kind of like, if you're pressing grapes for champagne, do you use an old basket press or do you use like a more modern machine? So that's kind of the comparison. But Mitobe-san's fune, it's very old and it doesn't do actually a great job of taking out all the rice leaves. So what you get at the end is actually a little bit cloudy. And then you can take that further and like rack off the sediment, and then you get clear sake. But for his usunigori, he uses the first press. And so he takes away the big solids, I guess kind of like the gross leaves, and then he's left with fine leaves. But depending on the rice harvest that year, the rice might melt more or less, and you get more ori, which is the fine leaves, or you might get less, right? So it kind of is like his litmus test for how well the rice melts each year, just how much of it, I guess. So yeah, like that, is that less taking away? I guess so, but it also, we have to talk about like whether we use a yabuta press or a fune press or bag press. Yeah.
And you said a word that's very interesting as well. I'm not sure if Asma's got it. You said usu nigori, so USU nigori, which is fine lees nigori, right?
Yeah. Ori, like if a brewer says ori biki, it's ori is the fine leaves and hiku means take away. So you want to take away that too. Then there's other things you can do. And I think I saw a question, someone says, what do you mean by melt? And often like we'll say like the rice melts, you've fermented it, right? So with koji and with the yeast, you need to dissolve the rice. So it's part of fermentation. Yeah.
Great. And because I mean that was so much interesting stuff. But if we just, I think we're gonna wrap it up just a bit on this concept, because I wanted to touch on Shiboritati, because I think that's something that's super important to differentiate between the wine world and the sake world, is that there will be producers that have super high per se intervention sake compared to, let's say, a Shiboritati, which is super low intervention. But the thing is, for them, the low intervention sake, it's only a style per se. It's not a philosophy. It's not something they would, let's say, believe in. Let's contrary to the wine world, where usually when a winemaker makes one natural wine in their lineup, the whole lineup will be natural wine, So right. I think, yeah, sometimes it's tricky to do some shortcuts, and it's really sometimes the case of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. It's just, trying to make, you know, that point. And
Yeah.
when we talked about, and I think you agreed on that comparison, is more correlated to the beer world per se, because some producers that say we'll do a GERS would be per se low intervention, in the sense that it will be spontaneous fermentation and there will be nothing added afterwards besides the 4 ingredients of beer. And compare it to, if they do a GERS, they could also do an IPA, which is, in my mind, super high intervention, because you're using all types of houblon, which is, I'm drawing blank over here. Some houblon. How do you call that?
Hops? Is that
Hops, yes, that's it. Some
Okay,
say, yeah.
thank you.
Thank you very much. I was really drawing blank over here. So they're using
Arnie said that. Yeah.
Thank you, Arnie.
Yeah.
So they were so if they're using hops like super tropical hops, sometimes doing like some crazy stuff, it doesn't really taste like beer at the end. But in their view, they're still doing beer. It's not, you know, they could do both and still would make sense. And that's where I think they both differentiate. So great. So I think we got a few key concepts out of the way. And I know that you mentioned that we're going to touch about rice production. I think that would be a great time to touch on it, because as you know, for natural wine, you know, the first principle would be to have at least organic principles in the vineyard, you know, to afterwards have very low intervention in your winemaking choices. So I think we should put on a question right now, and that's my cue for Asma, my little helpful little reindeer right now. And yeah, so maybe we should just put a question on the board, just to poll you guys on what is your view on it, and maybe we're going to change it, maybe we're going to comfort you in it. I'm not sure.
Which question?
What rice should you make natural sake? Yeah,
I'm coming. Okay. And we have an excellent question by Alexi about that
would be not this one, Asma, the one about
sorry.
rice. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know how to use it. Yeah, okay, I'm coming.
Still not this one.
Wait, I don't have my glasses, that's why.
But you look good though. You look good on camera.
Yeah, very pretty.
Okay. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
I did it.
So maybe when, just as people are trying to make up their minds and just trying to see what type of rice should be used to make natural sake, and I always use the quotation mark, and then can you, because we've touched really quickly upon the concept of shizenmai. We talked about nidahonke as well. We're doing shizenshu, but there's also an equivalent in the rice field that would be called shizenmai. Can you talk to us a little bit about it?
Yeah, with sake rice, I mean, table rice is a little bit of a different story, I guess, but with sake specific rice, it is extremely hard to grow.
Okay, I'll just stop you right there, and maybe can you quickly, because I know there's some geeks can you explain table rice and sake specific rice?
Oh, I see. Okay, table rice, sake specific rice. So table rice is rice that we eat at home in restaurants. You know, it's used for sushi. It's used for anything, your donburi at home. And these are rice varieties that grow all throughout Japan. They've been cultivated to produce results, right? And sake specific rice have been selected over the years to make rice that has a big grain, but each kernel, each grain is quite large, and the shinpaku, which is the starch concentration in the rice, that is big as well. So it makes there's all these things about sake specific rice that make it suitable for making sake. Whereas table rice, it grows everywhere and makes very good sake as well. But there is a difference, and also a difference in price. Yeah.
And can you, we have a base onto about what rice is sake specific and what is table rice. Can you elaborate a bit on shizenmai?
Yeah, so shizenmai, natural rice, I don't think is definitely not a legal definition. It is rice that's grown organically and then also without the use of pesticides. And some people go as far as saying they don't use any fertilizer, but you can also use organic fertilizers. So it really depends on who's talking about it. But usually it is organic rice in nature. Some people don't get certified though. I think most people don't get certified. So kind of like wine world too, I guess.
And so maybe we're going to touch a bit on organic right now. So is it, would you say it's a challenge to grow organic rice in Japan?
Yeah, rice cultivation in Japan is like more than 99.9%. It's by the like flooding system. So you've got your rice paddy and you flood the field, which came from China, most likely, is the theory. So that this way of farming, you don't get too many weeds usually, and you do get a good nitrogen circulation, but it is really hard to do completely without pesticides and also other things that we typically put in. So yeah, most farmers would say that that's just outrageous to try to do organic rice, and you definitely don't get the volume, of course, which isn't a problem for people like Nida-san, who says, well, it's worth it. But for farmers who depend on making a certain volume of rice every year, this can be an issue, right? So it has to probably cost more, or they have to be able to charge more for it.
And it's also a challenge for sake-specific rice, Shuzoku Tekimai, because there needs to be a lot of nitrogen in the soil, right, to grow large grain that could withstand polishing, and also that have shimpaku large enough to have a good fermentation, right?
Yeah, you also need the nitrogen for the fermentation itself. Like, it's an ingredient that you need, so somehow you need to get those things in there. So yeah, it is quite difficult. In Shiga, there's a producer that I can't think of the name for some reason right now, but they make a sake called Azola, Azola. And in their rice fields, on the surface of the water, there's this kind of, I guess, algae that grows on the surface. And this is actually what gives this field nitrogen. And so they can use organic farming methods for this. Yeah. But they drain it again twice a season, usually, I believe. So yeah, it's definitely a point of interest for many farmers, and people are talking about terroir and regionality a lot, but it's a big question mark at the moment.
And if it's such a challenge, would should we have the expectation for natural sake that it has to be organic rice? That's my question.
Yeah. Well, I think the question we talked about, you said, polishing, the rice needs to be able to withstand polishing, but if you didn't polish, then what is the problem? So if you're making sake with brown rice or very, very lightly polished rice, then you don't need the rice to be able to handle polishing. Right? So that's a big point as well. Yeah. Orangey sake.
Yeah, when you said sake made with the genmai, I just put a picture of musubi from Terada Honki, which I think, and maybe you can correct me on this one, is the only producer that does 100% genmai as a sake. And I'm not sure if you. I'm pretty sure though that you already had it, right?
Sorry? Yes, I've had this. Yeah. It's pretty interesting. It's pretty weird. I actually went to Terada Honke with, what is the group again? There's like a group of champagne producers, including Closerie, Prévost.
Jérôme Prévost, yeah.
Yeah, but he had a fight with one of the other champagne makers, so actually is now Solas is the leader. And then there's 4 other
there's a lot of people that have fights with Solas, but that's a whole nother story. Yes.
Yeah, but I got to go to the Honke with this big champagne producers, and they were very excited, but I think also confused about this sake. Yeah, but
I'm sure they were confused. Yes.
Yeah. This is very, unique that it's genmai, so it's brown rice. And yeah, as far as I know, they're the only ones making genmai. What's his name? Aramasa? So Sato-san in Akita Aramasa, he made a 90%, maybe it was more like 95. Anyways, he made a very high rice polish, which means, you have a lot more of the rice, right? Made a sake with very little polishing. And he said that when he put it into the yabuta, when he tried to press it,
The press, yes.
yeah, the bags got super sticky with the oil because the rice genmai has way more oils like fats. And so his bags for with the press got so clogged that he had to shut down his brewery for 2 days just to clean it. So if you make very ricey sake and then you try to press it the same way that you would with a 50% rice, then you're not going to be able to adjust. So Terada Honke, I'm pretty sure they don't use yabuta for.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah,
for sure. I'm pretty, because I went there also
sure
last
bags,
winter.
right?
So yes,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure because they do shizuku, which is daigo no shizuku. So that's for sure. They got some bags.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure it's funeshibori
Yeah,
as well.
I can't imagine him having a high-tech yabuta.
That would be very, very bizarre.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
You go in. Do you see the chickens by the entranceway? There's like
Yes.
chickens in a well, and then to have a yabuta inside would be very not on brand. So I'm sure it's not like that. But yeah, so this is pretty unique, and it changes in the bottle. It changes every year. Yeah.
And so that's very interesting that we're talking about Terada Honke, because that's a great segue, I think, in our next topic. And we'll go back for sure on rice production, but just I want to have a little segue on koji, because I mean koji is, as you know, there's the saying ichikoji, nimoto, and sansukuri. So basically, first and foremost, koji, which is the most important aspect. The second aspect would be shubo, which is the yeast starter. And then the third aspect would be the morumi, or the main fermentation as well. So koji is super, super important in sake making. And because I'm doing this explanation just to maybe talk about producers that do their own koji, or producers that do natural koji, natural tani koji. Maybe you could explain quickly what koji is. I know that's a hard task, and maybe have a small explanation also of what tani koji is. Maybe we can touch about quickly upon afterwards what Terada Honke does.
Okay, I should have done this earlier, but in my fridge I have a bag of tani koji, so I'll be right back.
Great, perfect.
Yeah.
I'll just dance while people wait, or maybe Asma can help me.
I can always dance.
So maybe I have a picture as well of Masaru Terada, which is the toji, or the head brewer, and also the Kuramoto, which is the CEO of Terada Honke, here in the Kojimuro, which is the koji room right now. I'll put it in.
Oh yeah.
Great. Here she goes. But yeah, so when I was visiting last winter, it was very, very interesting because he was doing some genmai koji, which is brown rice koji, which nobody does except for him. And that koji was going into, I should say, the musubi barley.
Yeah, this is, I'm very sure, well, not very sure actually, but as far as we know, right? I think he's the only one making his own koji.
Yes, also, and he's also, because I think that was what we wanted to touch upon with Terada Honke, is that he does his own tani koji, which he takes. I'll let you explain it.
Yeah,
Mariko. Yes.
But he does make his own tani. So this is, sorry, I can't open it. But I had some koji sent from a Kyoto koji producer. So koji, aspergillus oryzae, it's what's responsible for creating enzymes that will break down the starches in the rice into sugar. So whether you're making miso with rice or beans or wheat, you need some sort of koji. This is sake specific koji that this Kyoto producer sells, but they also sell koji for miso, for amazake, for soy sauce as well. So it's really fine powders. So tane means seeds, and so this is the koji spores, and it's going to be grown.
Maybe I'll stop you right there,
Yeah.
because I think that's super interesting, and even I think even the let's say the intermediary sake geeks, they maybe don't have the knowledge that there's, when we say koji, usually we can refer to three things: kome koji, tani koji, and kojikin, right? Maybe we can separate those three.
So okay, so tane koji, that is
sorry to put you on the spot.
Okay, yeah, koji kin. So koji kin is actual, I guess the literal translation is kin, bacteria,
microbes, maybe.
Microbes, thank you. Yeah, microbes. Yep. Whereas this is this is what's gonna grow, and you're gonna grow the spores. And then this is kome koji, which is rice koji, and this has this is cooked rice that has this grown on the warm cooked rice, and now this is starting to break down the starches in the rice into sugar. So when I eat this and chew on it, it's going to be quite sweet, because the koji spores, the enzymes that are being created, are starting to break down the starches into sugars, which is why it's sweet when I chew on it. And also the digestive enzymes in my mouth, of course, as well. So what we're saying is that Terada-san, in this picture here, with in this very humid looking room, he not only makes this, which is normal for all sake makers, except for the really big ones, he's making this, right, which you usually buy in bags bigger than this often, but they usually buy this, sprinkle this onto the steamed rice, and over 48 hours, give or take, you've got kome koji. But he's making this. So it's really weird. Unique, maybe not weird, unique.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there's only about like half a dozen producers of tani koji in Japan, right?
Yeah.
So basically everyone uses about, the same producers.
Yeah. All 6 of these guys, of these people still selling koji, they're working with soy sauce manufacturers as well as sake breweries.
Great.
Yeah.
So that was super interesting. So just to make sure everybody understands, kojikin is the microbe, which is on tane koji, which is the powder, which is grown on kome koji, which is the rice, which has been inoculated with the kojikin, basically. So great. And maybe we're just gonna do a jump back a little bit and go back to rice production. I think it's interesting just to talk about maybe what they call, and that is definitely a term that it's been that they have gotten from the wine world, which is what they call now the domain breweries. So basically the breweries or the kura that actually grow their own rice. Because maybe not a lot of people know, especially people that come from the wine world, they would think, oh, so basically all breweries, they grow their own rice, but that's definitely not the case, right? Definitely
not, yeah. There's a very few handful of breweries that grow their own rice, and it's certainly not, it's all of it is pretty hard to do. Even people like Kuheiji who say domain for some things, it is not for all of it. Yeah. So this is the Kozaemon House Junmai, and that's on the screen. And this is made with Mizunami Nishiki. So Nishiki is a word that means that it's only for rice, but it means a weave or weaving together. So Nishiki, if you see the word Nishiki, it's usually about the rice, and it means that it's a cross of different rice. Mizunami is the city that they're in. So this is their local rice, and it's actually table rice. It's not sake specific rice, but table rice that they brew with. And this goes back to really the origins of the brewery, where the family were landowners, and they had some extra rice, and the government said, can you make sake with this? Because the government wanted to tax them. So they got some incentive to brew sake, and that's how this brewery started, which is a lot of producers. Yeah, they started by the push of the government. Yeah.
Yes, so it's only been like, as we were saying when we talked before, a generation ago, that those guys can actually grow their own rice.
Yeah, it was illegal for many, many years until very recently for companies, for corporations to own farmland, so that after World War II, they wanted to make sure that people, actual citizens, got to eat. So they banned corporations from being able to own, to have ownership. Yeah.
And so we had Nida Honke for sure that grow their own rice. I think they're one of the producers that have one of the highest ratio from rice that they grow themselves compared to what they buy, if I'm correct. Yes. Okay.
And what they buy is within, like they said, we stand on our roof and we can see all of our partners. So even if they don't grow it themselves, they know exactly where the rice comes from, and it's their neighbors. Yeah.
And you know what would be the percentage about, like what they grow compared to what they...
I don't know exactly those numbers, but I know it's a pretty, like you said, it's a pretty big amount. And like Mitobe-san grows maybe 30% of his own rice, and that's a pretty high number too. So I think maybe Nida's like maybe 50-60% is their own. Yeah.
Still, you know, so that's maybe that it could be very, I wouldn't say appalling, but very surprising for someone in the wine world, that someone that would grow a lot of rice, a big percentage of rice from themselves, would be only like 50 or 60%. So I mean, that's also a big difference, you know, when we're talking about the sake.
But contract farming has become a lot more like closer relationships. So, you know, that wasn't even really common until very recently. So now farmers have direct relationships rather than going through the prefectural government co-ops. And that makes it much easier to see what the farmers are doing, like how they're trading the rice and what they've had to do each season. So yeah, there's a lot more transparency for sure. And the younger brewers are actually interested and curious about that, which isn't, the older generation wasn't famous for it.
And also what's very, well, I wouldn't say different from the wine world, but I know that some producers farm their own rice, and they farm their own rice within their own prefecture, but also like sometimes very far away from their prefecture, right?
Yeah, you know, not all prefectures are suited for growing rice, and if they particularly want to work with, let's say, Yamada Nishiki, that's going to be hard in Hokkaido, for example. But there's a lot more like kind of locality to farming and rice farming in particular now. So yeah, we're seeing more and more closer relationships and geographically closer sources. And Yamada Nishiki is great, but some people think that there is a lot more interesting rice out there. I guess I don't think you guys chose a single Yamada Nishiki rice actually this time.
I don't think we have Yamada Nishiki. No, we only chose some cool, like Wataribune, which is super cool. Yamada Nishiki, as you said, I think is very interesting.
Yeah, you didn't choose a single Yamada Nishiki. Interesting.
Yeah, so we're definitely running almost our time. I just want to wrap up. Yes, as much I just want to wrap up maybe the rice part of it for natural sake. So I mean, first and foremost, I think what's very important would be that the brewer has some kind of control on the rice that they have. So maybe an element of having a contracted farmer, of some kind of locality to the rice, and I mean, something that would be very nice as well for natural sake would be to have your rice to be organic, you know. But that's as we talked about, it's something of a rarity in the sake world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we'll touch rapidly with people. Maybe they want to, because I think that's something that's very central to the wine world. Maybe we can just quickly talk about yeast, because you know, natural wine, one of the base of natural wine is having indigenous yeast or spontaneous yeast, but it's definitely something that's way different, you know, in the sake world. Can you? I know we talked about a concept which is Kuratsuki Kobo. Can you elaborate a bit on what Kuratsuki Kobo is?
Kuratsuki, so kura meaning brewery, so it's in the walls of the brewery, literally. So it can be, it's probably a mix of things, or one yeast that's been there for generations. Could be the main yeast, but it's ambient, basically, yeast. So as is with breweries for beer, you've got things that have been living there for many generations, or for a period of time. Yeah, so yeast, mostly it is not ambient yeast, it's not spontaneous fermentation, except for people like Terada Honke or Nida Honke. Usually you have to pitch some sort of yeast in order to have a secure fermentation. Some people do a different method where they take a finished shibo, so they take a scoop of fermentation starter, and it's called Sashimoto. There we go. I did remember it. Sashimoto. So you've got a lot of yeast population in your finished starter, and you put that into your next starter. So you have a good population of yeast to work with. Yeah. So it's and there's people like Amabuki that are using flower yeast as well. That's taken from local, flowers or different plants.
Yes, because the thing is that that's a bit confusing, let's say from someone from the wine world, when they say kuratsuki kobo, basically, which is which would translate into yeast that comes from the brewery, right?
Yeah.
It could mean two things. It could mean one thing would be proprietary yeast, meaning yeast that they have isolated themselves and that they're using for their own sake, and they're the only one that uses it. Like that would be to be in a position with Kyokai Kobo, which is brewer society yeast, which everyone can use. And Kuratsuki Kobo can also mean ambient yeast, but that's in a much minor percentage, right? That's something that's very rare. And I've put a picture of Terada Honke, because he's Terada-san, as you said, he's kind of I wouldn't say the master, but he's definitely someone that could be looked at the picture child, I should say, of natural sake. And that's him doing Kimoto. Well, I should say Yamaoroshi. But yes, so they're definitely using ambient yeast, and that's somewhat of a rarity, right, in the sake world.
Yeah, it's not it's not as guaranteed to get results. So and you truly don't really know what you're going to get. So even less than wine, I think you have less secure results. And it's Yamaoroshi. Yeah, I think he did say that he had some failed batches in the beginning, right? As do most people who try this method from the beginning.
And I just, because you told me something so interesting earlier, maybe I want to finish on this anecdote before we wrap it up. That's Oni-san, which is the Toji, Kuramoto Toji from Jikon.
Yeah.
Maybe some of you guys had the chance to buy the cases that are already sold out. And you told me something so interesting about him and about his cleanliness.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So Oni-san, he used to work for quite a big dairy company in Japan, and they are, it's a dairy company, so you have to be very clean. You have to be very like by the books for everything to make sure people are drinking milk that's safe, of course. But that's kind of where his cleanliness came from, his concepts came from. And apparently this dairy company had a bit of a scandal back in the 80s or he's not that old, so maybe 90s. And because of that, he feels extra responsible to make sure his sake brewing and his brewery is very, very sanitary. But because of that, he, when he was trying to make Kimoto for the first time, which he doesn't do for Jikon, but for his kind of pet project sake brand called Takasago, he made Kimoto. And the very first time he did it, it didn't ferment. Like the shibo, the starter wouldn't get going because he'd been so clean with his brewery that there wasn't enough yeast in the air to get it going. So he had to ask dial a friend for help. And he also said that he took his spoiled, or like not spoiled, but failed batch, and very sadly poured it back into rice fields. He wanted to put the sake back where it came from. So yeah,
very expensive fertilizer, right?
Yeah. But I'm sure the rice that grew there next year was really good. But yeah, he learned to kind of not be less clean, of course, but to allow some of the yeast that you want to take over for the kimoto to live. Yeah.
Great. So I think we should just wrap things up, and afterwards we'll definitely take some questions. I'm sure Asma has a few of them in the works. I just wanted to ask you one last question, basically, and maybe it's a good time to have people just poll people and to ask them if they think that natural sake is something that exists. So I know I didn't want to start with asking you that question, but I think I can end with asking you that question. So, does it exist? Is it a thing? Or should we not call it natural sake? What should we call it? You hearing me, Mariko?
Oh, me? You're asking me?
Yes, yes, I'm asking you. I'm asking people. Yes,
I was waiting for the Jeopardy song, which me.
What is natural sake?
Yeah, what is natural sake? Yeah, it's a question that I think I have more questions for usually after thinking about it or talking about it than I have answers for. So, is it a thing? Parts of it are, I think we've talked about this before, low intervention or less intervention sake probably makes more sense to me as like the phrase or the definition goes. I think natural sake, to put it into one terminology or one definition, is probably not doing it justice, nor like, like the wine world might be the wine world's already confused enough about what natural wine is that we don't need to throw in natural sake to the mix. Yeah. So certain parts of it, certain elements, certain philosophies, I think are very much true to sake, not just from the wine world, but from history and from the way society's moving in Japan, around the world. But I think natural sake, I would rather go with low intervention sake. Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's a great answer that makes a lot of sense. And I think you just gave a really, really good example with the Jikon example, because if you're saying natural sake is something, then you should only put rice and water in a vat and something would happen. But no, nothing happens. So I mean, there's a lot of intervention required in sake, to make it happen. So
yeah.
me too. I don't feel very comfortable, and that's why the whole time I was saying natural with quotation mark, because really for me, it's not, the two concepts don't really jive together for many reasons that we've gone through in this panel. So really, I want to thank you first and foremost so much, Mariko. And I mean, just maybe to wrap up, just to tell you guys, if you want to taste some of the sakes that we talked about, especially I should say the kozaimon, which is made with their Mizunami Nishiki rice, which is super good, which is very on the cocoa,
savory,
savory, very fresh mushrooms, definitely umami driven sake is very, very nice. And also we got the wataribune, which is super explosive, super fruity, but also very voluptuous, as you called it, and I really like the adjective.
And that one with a little bit of water, like because it's geishu undiluted, you can add a little bit of water or pour it over ice, and it dilutes it just a touch. So you're having it in different ways. You can drink it in many ways.
Very interesting, yes. And I mean, you can do also, both of them are very good, what we call kanzake, which is warm sake. Both of them, I think, would be super interesting as well.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people like to do nama kanzake, but I think because of the structure of the naminoto wataribune, I think it would be super interesting.
Yeah, so, you get a little bit more smoky notes. Sorry, I cut you off there.
Yeah, no. Go ahead. You say
a bit smoky, a bit like cheesier, and then also the kozaimon, the goddess at the bottom. That one is aged for a year, which is why you've got these like caramely, kind of sweeter but savory. Yeah.
Yes.
And they're both powerful, good sakes.
Yes, but very different also on the nose is quite different.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to have both of them. I think there's two great sakes, and they're very interesting just to try and find which style you kind of like.
Yeah.
So I think we'll wrap it up. We'll still only 15 minutes over. I really want to thank you, Mariko, for taking the time. It was such a pleasure preparing it and having you over here discuss it. It was thank you so much for your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I can't believe we covered all those things in an hour and 15 minutes.
Well, there's a
kinda
lot
crazy.
of stuff we haven't covered, but
Yeah.
two presentation with all the stuff you wanted to cover, but that you know it is.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I put the links for those of you that maybe want to grab the 3-4 cases left of l'automnal. So thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank
Bye.
you.